When my cerulean front door becomes a weapon in a war against a tyrannical HOA, will my quirky spirit or their rigid rules prevail in this epic showdown? It was just another Tuesday morning, and as I shuffled to the mailbox in my inevitable state of pajama chic, think graphic tee, definitely wrinkled sweatpants, and hair that looked like it had been styled by a tornado, I spotted it. A pristine white envelope, stuffed between bills and pizza flyers, bearing the official insignia of our illustrious Homeowners Association. I could practically hear Karen Preston's evil chuckle echoing from that pastel-infused lair she called an office. The HOA was ticked off, and not just mildly perturbed, they were in full-on outrage mode over my audacious choice of front door color. Apparently, the cerulean blue I had splashed across my door was an affront to some unwritten rule about tranquility and blandness. Who knew the defendant's color wheel could land a guy under HOA scrutiny? Just as I was preparing my best eye-roll response, something that practically dripped with sarcasm, of course, ding-dong, the doorbell rang. I flung the door wide open, only to be greeted by a duo of pompous, badge-wearing inspectors, each more self-important than the last. Seriously, their badges gleamed like they were fresh off the assembly line. "Good morning. We are here to address the violation of community standards," said the taller one, his voice booming and entirely too serious for my still-sleeping cerebrum. Clenching my teeth to suppress a laugh, I could not believe I was being inspected by what looked like an overzealous mall cop and someone who must have just graduated from the How to Seem Intimidating with Zero Muscle Mass school of gesturing. Yet, unbeknownst to them, I had a small, mischievous arsenal quietly documenting this spectacle. My home? It wasn't just a whimsical abode overflowing with quirky decor. It was fortified with cameras, streaming everything live to my unsuspecting yet highly amused friend Danny. The haze of indignation thickened as I imagined his face, perched in front of his laptop, ready to unleash some quippy commentary about these so-called inspectors. I imagined him diving into conspiracy theories. Maybe they were undercover agents sent to penetrate the inner workings of suburbia. A laugh bubbled up, pictured in the absurdity of it all. They had quite the task ahead of them, dealing with a citizen who loved breaking the mold, starting with an incident involving my blue door. Sorry, Karen, not a one-size-fits-all type of guy here. As the inspectors launched into their overdramatic spiel about community standards, I couldn't help but feel a surge of empowerment. I had taken refuge in the absurd theater of HOA liability, where unsolicited opinions were the real plague. I didn't realize this neighborhood had its very own SWAT team for door color violations. I quipped, arms crossed defiantly. The shorter inspector squinted at me in disbelief, as if I had just suggested that unicorns roamed freely in my backyard. You could practically feel the palpable tension in the air, the kind you'd find in a bad cop movie. I seized the moment like a pro, tossing in my sarcastic quips that I may or may not have prepared for just this kind of occasion. The drama intensified when, just as the inspectors rifled through their scripts, Danny's text dinged in my pocket. "Dude, we're live," it read, accompanied by a string of emojis that looked like a mixture of popcorn and a roaring lion. Oh, sweet heavens, this was not going to end well for her or her badge-wielding goon. How could they be that dense, showing up without checking, if the house was basically a live broadcast of all their foolishness? This was the stuff of legends, and I was Claire in the lion's den of suburban entitlement. They were prepped to launch a field operation against my door, while I was ready to launch their antics into internet infamy. I couldn't wait for the hashtag hopeful to trend. The wild juxtaposition of their serious demeanor against my casual defiance created the kind of comedic atmosphere that made sitcoms great. "Is that your official badge of disrespect?" I retorted, pointing to the inspector's shiny emblem. Their incredulous expressions were priceless. Honestly, if I could have bottled that moment, I would have made millions. The taller inspector sputtered some nonsense about rules and decorum, while I hastened to play up the absurdity of an HOA oversight committee sending out muscle-clad inspectors for a blue front door. "What's next? Are you raiding my fridge for too many condiments?" With every snarky comment, I could feel the power shift ever so slightly in my direction. Their quest for checkmate became ludicrous as I realized this was less about a paint violation and more about their blatant invasion of my life. Little did they know this battle was pre-recorded like a Broadway show. As I stood amidst the chaos unfolding at my front door, I couldn't help but think that in a world full of rules, someone had to be the protagonist capable of embracing absurdity and wielding it like a weapon. And with my cameras rolling, I would ensure they faced the collective outrage of a bemused internet, ready to stand up to Karen's self-proclaimed reign of terror. Because if they thought they were taking down my front door, they'd soon learn that I wasn't one to be taken lightly or quietly. And thus, with the fate of my vibrantly defiant door hanging in the balance, I prepared for a round of verbal sparring that would take this HOA drama to ludicrous heights. The tension in my entryway was palpable, a concoction of indignation, sarcasm, and an absurd amount of musty indignation, all being put on blast for an audience of over 100 folks tuning in to my live stream. As I stood there with my arms crossed, a human barricade against their ignorance, I could feel Danny's enthusiasm seeping through the screen. "Dude, this is better than reality TV," his typed commentary read, coupled with a virtual collection of popcorn emojis. Honestly, if I weren't so riled up, I might have marveled at my growing online stardom. But no, we were engaged in an epic showdown of house pride versus HOA absurdity, one I was determined to win. "Look, gentlemen," the taller inspector started, waving his hands as if conducting an orchestra of chaos, "we're just enforcing community standards." I couldn't help but snicker at the realization these two misfits thought they were some sort of Avengers in blue blazers fighting crime. "You're telling me the highest crime in our community is a cerulean door?" I shot back, conjuring the image of them donning capes and chasing after rogue paint jobs like the neighborhood's Robin Hood. "Next, you'll be telling me I can't plant flamingos in the yard without a permit." The absurdity of the moment fueled my sass, and I could practically hear the internet cheering. My camera was doing its job more than I realized. As their bewilderment peaked, the shorter guy lifted my precious garden gnome, the one I named Sir Gnome a lot, holding it up like a prized trophy. "This is a decorative hazard. Residents have complained," he huffed. If I'd had $1 for every time a decently placed gnome had sparked outrage, I'd be living in a mansion afar from these HOA shenanigans. "Oh no, my garden gnome could make someone trip on their way to the mailbox," I replied, rolling my eyes so hard I thought they might just get stuck. How dare I let whimsy infiltrate this glorious neighborhood like a rogue grasshopper? "Sir Gnome-a-Lot stands watch over my daisies. He's practically our neighborhood mascot." I could practically see the wheels turning in these wannabe enforcers' heads as my words washed over and through them, mostly resulting in confused faces. Meanwhile, Danny's commentary started to come in like clockwork. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a gnome rebellion. Watch as they try to take it down." It was enough to kick up the theater of the situation a few notches. I could feel the audience's enjoyment, a crowd rallying around my defiance of HOA tyranny, wrapped up in the ridiculousness of real-life enforcement shenanigans. Heck, I wouldn't be surprised if my online followers wanted to start a Save Sir Gnome a Lot campaign, complete with t-shirts and a catchy hashtag. Then there it was, that unmistakable expression from Karen, the mastermind behind this home inspection nightmare, peeking through my living room window, a combination of horror and disbelief. Her precious, pristine reputation among neighbors, the mighty HOA queen, was crumbling in real time, streaming to an audience on the edge of their virtual seats. I could practically feel her glare through the screen. "Maybe," I suggested, just to up the ante, "we should charge these fellows a stipend for their inspection, perhaps 10 a minute in gnome-related fines." I pointed directly at Sir Gnome a Lot as they exchanged flustered glances. This was not the type of compliance they had signed up for, and I was loving every minute of it. "You see, this is how you're making the HOA look," I continued, taking things full circle. "Here you are, professional, upscale gentlemen, harassing a sincere homeowner who dares to have a little personality in his front yard. We're practically a sitcom at this point. Maybe we should sell the rights to the show?" The echo of my words hung in the air like the finest morsel of confrontation, and I relished the challenge of holding my ground against their absurdity. With each quip I dropped, the situation morphed into my personal stage, a farcical reality where I had the upper hand, armed with nothing but quick wit and a colorful imagination. "So what's next, guys?" I leaned forward with an exaggerated flourish. "Will you be unveiling a hidden stash of unicorn decorations?" Things were spiraling in the best possible way, and I didn't plan to end this circus anytime soon. With cameras rolling and a live audience cheering me on from their couches, I knew the tipping point of their authority had been crossed. The duo was starting to look more like comic relief than inspectors, all poise and seriousness bleeding into blunders. I could see their flimsy resolve chipping away like cheap paint under harsh scrutiny. "If this is your method of upholding community standards," I jabbed, "I'd like to request an audit on your shockingly ill-equipped standards. It's clear a few more college courses in social interactions wouldn't hurt." I couldn't contain my laughter as they floundered, utterly at a loss. It was clear that in the grand scheme of HOA absurdity, Karen and her lackeys were about to become the punchline of my very own comedy special, and the warm glow of victory was rising. In a world rife with unyielding rules and entitled tyrants, it was refreshing to pull back the curtain on the absurdity lurking behind the exterior of perfectly manicured lawns. As the camera buzzed on, I could feel the energy shift in my favor, a wholly liberating realization dawning upon me. It was time to move things to the next level. Perhaps I should start planning the gnome's Hollywood debut. Because, let's face it, this battle was hardly over. It had just begun. The atmosphere in my living room buzzed with electric anticipation, like an audience waiting for the punchline that would steal the show. As I continued my spirited performance against these charlatans masquerading as inspectors, I couldn't help but relish the spectacle unfolding. My viewers erupted in laughter as Danny Liv typed a stream of commentary that could elevate any mundane situation into viral gold. "Do you think they came here on a gnome-buster vehicle?" he quipped, and my heart swelled at how we had managed to turn a ridiculous invasion into a full-blown comedy flick. Meanwhile, the faux inspectors stood there, like deer caught in headlights, their bewildered expressions a radiant glow of pure disbelief. They glanced at each other, then back to my gnome, as if trying to decide who would dare negotiate the fine line between dignity and absurdity first. I watched with gleeful satisfaction, further fanning the flames. "You know, I didn't think you guys could ever surpass the already ludicrous reputation of HOA enforcers across America, but here you are, being outdone by a garden ornament," I exclaimed, playing the audience like an experienced comedian. Oh, the irony! A gnome taking down two grown men in blazers. It was then that I noticed Jake, my energetic wildcard friend, sauntering into the scene with his own brand of chaos. He burst through the door, announcing his presence in typical Jake style. "Did I hear someone talking about gnomes? Count me in." His entry was like throwing confetti at a wedding, completely unexpected and overly delightful. "What's happening here? Is this a gnome inspection party I wasn't invited to?" he added, grabbing a fake microphone from nowhere and feigning a broadcast. The simultaneous shock and laughter that erupted from the live chat was a magnificent sight, transforming a dreary HOA interrogation into the community's most entertaining event. Jake's antics sent me spiraling into a fit of laughter, and the offensive inspectors looked absolutely lost among our laughter-filled banter. They weren't just losing control, they were slipping every ounce of credibility they'd half-heartedly clung to since stepping into my domain. The taller one spoke up, stammering slightly. "We'll have you know this is a serious matter." Of course, this only fueled the comedic flames. "Oh yes, the seriousness of inspecting someone's front yard gnome. Do you have a gnome category on your resume?" I retorted, winking at the camera, as the comment section exploded with gifs of rolling laughter. At the apex of this spectacle, Karen made her entrance, eyes blazing with indignation, as if she had just walked into a heated bar brawl rather than my cozy living room. The sight of her pristine pastel blouse clashing with my whimsical gnome decorations was a visual masterpiece. For truly, it felt like the abstract representation of HOA tyranny versus my desire to remain uniquely me. "What on earth is going on here?" she demanded, a note of inescapable authority lacing her words. The livestream audience collectively held their breath, transfixed on the intersection of her audacity and my steadfast humor. "Well, Karen," I said while forcing down a smile, "we've been discussing whether the gnome is a hazard to community standards or a hero of whimsy and creativity. Care to join?" The tension in the air danced dangerously close to comic relief, a juxtaposition of rigid authority and eye-rolling absurdity. Of course, Karen was not one to be easily swayed by humor. Her disdain for any challenge against her authority radiated like a bull charging through a field of daisies. "This is outrageous. You're encouraging chaos, Alex," she shot back, completely missing the tapestry of support and joy woven by my growing audience and the camaraderie of my friends. "Chaos, you say? I'm merely expanding horizons," I replied with a grandiose hand gesture, as if I were unveiling a masterwork of art been draped for years. Besides, we couldn't have a gnome appeal without the illustrious Karen spectating to ensure the community remains pure. With her presence now palpable in the room, I wondered if it was time to turn the gnome into a full-on celebrity. Merely hat-tipping at their incompetence wouldn't suffice. "You see, I propose a gnome gala, right here in my front yard," I declared, playing it up. "It'll raise funds not just for the fine that I'm sure will come, but for the HOA's trapped enthusiasm for joy." The idea struck me as outdated and absurd, yet somehow it was the logical conclusion. Who wouldn't want to celebrate gnomes, spirits of lawn care, and brigadiers of home cheer? I could envision a festive extravaganza against the backdrop of my home, all while my cameras streamed every whimsical moment. With the tides of this HOA battle swelling dramatically, one thing was clear. I had ignited a gathering filled with laughter, camaraderie, and love for our oddball personalities. Little did they know, I was just getting started. Interactive chaos ensued. As I looked around, it seemed I had sparked a mini-revolution. My living room was now a vibrant hub of ridiculousness. Danny was trading quips with Jake as they plotted a gnome uprising, while the poor faux inspectors stood frozen, a giant, unwitting part of our quirky performance. With the livestream audience chiming in, my chat was igniting an inventory of support ranging from Gnome Gala, best idea ever, to are we really just ignoring the fact that they literally don't know HOA law? I mean, who could resist such delicious irony? It felt like a live spectator sport, only with more absurdity than I'd ever bargained for. And oh, did I relish every second. Just then, the absurd spectacle reached new heights when Karen decided to turn this circus into her personal stage. This is not a laughing matter, Alex. People's homes, their very standards are at stake, she declared, puffing herself up in that overly dramatic way only a true Karen could manage. I took a moment, savoring her outrage like a fine wine, before responding. Oh, but it is hilarious! You've arrived just in time for the grand finale of our live broadcast. Who knew HOA guidelines could make us all laugh? You should consider adding clowning to your skill set. The chat exploded with emojis, and the playful banter set the tone for my mounting rebellion. Karen's face flushed a shade that could only be described as indignant tomato, while the inspectors shuffled awkwardly as if I had just handed them a compendium of unactuated horror. Seriously, what were they expecting? A polite entrance and a few rounds of tea. As if on cue, Danny chimed in, I bet they left their gnome expertise badges in the Gnome Buster vehicle parked out front. I knew it. This prompted an onslaught of laughter from the audience, and even I had to fight back the tears as Jake began doing a parody of their inspection procedures, waving an imaginary clipboard around with exaggerated seriousness. You could see my viewers collectively vibing with the absurdity. This was a modern-day comedy set against the tyranny of the HOA. However, even amidst this comical ruckus, the main event was yet to unfold. I decided to seize the moment, to ride the tidal wave of humor right into the heart of the matter. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and gnomes, I boomed in my best mock announcer voice, welcome to the inaugural Gnome Gala, a night where absurdity reigns and HOA enforcement meets its match. There will be gnome races, gnome art contests, and of course, a debate on the constitutional rights of garden decorations. The residents, drawn like moths to a flame, began commenting with excitement, their thumbs typing faster than my heart could race. Yes, let's host this ludicrous celebration that even the snobbiest HOA members couldn't refuse with their twisted sense of social standards intact. The air thrummed with energy as my mind spun possibilities faster than a hamster on a wheel. Gala decorations? Check. Costume gnomes? Check. Instant invitations sent to the neighborhood? Check. What Karen had thought was an invasion was now shaping up to be a community affair, a giant chorus of laughter echoing into the suburban abyss. I can already picture it, I said, the HOA board unanimously voting for a gnome ordinance. Who wouldn't want to live in a world where gnome regulations are on par with actual laws? The chat exploded again, finding glee in the fictional landscape I had conjured. The absurdity built momentum, driven by my disdain for their entitlement and the audience's shared laughter. It was rapidly transforming into something beautiful. But as I reveled in this ridiculous opportunity, a flicker of awareness hit me. Would they actually dare to shut down my gnome celebration? Surely they wouldn't stoop so low as to ban whimsical cheer. Suddenly, I found myself in a battle of wills against Karen. I pretended to contemplate. Oh wait, are you actually going to try and deny the community a little festivity? Can you imagine the headlines? Karen the Fun Police strikes again. As though I had flicked a switch, the faux inspectors, caught in this whirlwind, found their voices floundering. Well, we don't, one started, only to be met with further laughter from my audience. Karen's outrage hit new levels. She was a live wire ready to blow. This is a blatant disregard for community decorum, she fumed, emphasizing decorum as if it were an incantation that would zap away my delightful plans. Oh goodness, are we discussing decorum now? What happened to the laws of HOA? Isn't that more important? I shot back, mirroring her indignation with a fervor only fueled by sheer delight. I could practically see Karen's wheels turning, her mighty gavel ready to crash down on our celebration, yet my livestream blossomed under the cosmic forces of community support and rebellion against pompous entitlement. My hazel eyes glimmered with excitement. This endeavor was bigger than me, bigger than the HOA. No, this was about reclaiming joy one gnome at a time. As our back and forth continued, the stage was set for the ultimate showdown between laughter and entitlement, a gnome extravaganza adorned with wit, absurdity, and a sprinkle of rebellion. Little did Karen know, as formidable as she thought she was poking a grizzly bear that finally felt unleashed and incomparably joyful. How deliciously gratifying. The real kicker. This pandemonium was just the beginning of our growing gnome-loving community as we rallied together, and I was poised and ready to transform every absurdity into a moment of ultra-viral hilarity. As the faux inspectors fumbled through their scripted lines displaying expressions that ranged from bewildered to faux pas horror, I felt emboldened by the overwhelming support pouring through the live stream chat. It was as if I had accidentally stumbled upon a comedy club where everyone was in on the joke, except for these hapless inspectors. "Look at them, Danny," I shouted, gesturing dramatically toward the confused trio. "They should charge admission for the privilege of watching them squirm. Anyone taking bets on how long until someone accidentally spills the beans about their gnome-busting qualifications?" The audience roared with laughter as Danny contributed with a cheeky, "I'll put $5 down that the only thing they bust is my patience." Fueled by our amusement, I decided to turn the volume up on this absurd production. Stepping into my role as the reluctant, yet defiant leader of the grassroots anti-HOA movement, I threw my arms wide like a stage performer ready for the encore. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing is a clash of titans. On one side, we have the champions of conformity, dressed in pastel blouses and wielding clipboards as if they were swords. And on the other, we have, well, whatever this chaos is. Laughter erupted once again, and I could see my view count climbing higher, each notification fueling my resolve to expose this charade for what it was. "Where's the actual HOA? I think they forgot to send an adult to this meeting." The comments exploded with clever comebacks and clever puns. My house transformed into a theater where entitlement met its match. Meanwhile, Karen looked like the main act of a circus that was spiraling out of control. With her face a ripe shade of crimson, she somehow managed to project both fury and flustered disbelief. "This is absolutely not an appropriate way to handle community issues, Alex," she shouted, attempting to assert her authority over the merry band of gnome enthusiasts in my living room. "I may have approached this wrong," I mused loudly, pretending to be deep in thought. "But did anyone consider that you just skipped the part where we discuss actual issues? Like why the HOA carpool line takes longer than a flight at LAX. Every commentary added layers to my plan. This was no longer just about inspection. It was about revealing the colossal gap between what entitlement thought it could achieve and what we would allow. And then it dawned on me. If I was going to really raise the stakes, I needed to leverage the very absurdity of what the HOA had become, a self-sustaining entity of entitlement looking to police gnomes and gardens rather than fostering community. I feigned a gasp of revelation. "Wait, what if we organized this as a fundraiser? We could call it the Great Gnome Gala for HOA Awareness. Tickets could be sold to raise money for the Society of Hilarious Garden Traditions or something equally absurd. How about a gnome fashion show?" At that moment, a wave of excitement washed over the chat as the viewers embraced the ludicrous idea. "I can already picture it," one commenter quipped. "Gnomes strutting down the runway in designer outfits. I'd pay to see that." I grinned wider, envisioning a day where we dressed gnomes in tailored outfits, each represented by a neighborhood resident fighting against the HOA. The whole idea was ridiculous, and that's precisely why it felt exhilarating. My mind surged with thoughts of costumes, decorations, and even gnome-inspired snacks. "I bet my collection of garden carrots could work as appetizers," I shouted, half believing it. "We could charge a premium for gourmet Twinkies, or how about gnome cupcakes?" The audience rallied around me as we excitedly planned this event that was clearly less about the celebration of HOA standards and more about a community reclaimed from the clutches of overregulation and entitlement. Karen, now visibly agitated, interjected in a huff, "You think you can just create this ridiculous circus and have everyone comply?" That only sent my audience into another spiral of guided laughter. The sheer audacity of her entitlement was the cherry on top of this raucous sundae of irony. As we laughed at her spectacle, I sensed a rush of empowerment coursing through me. No longer was this a small battle in a war against the HOA, it had morphed into a movement, a comedic revolt that had the potential to ripple through our community. With a glance at Danny, whose eyes sparkled with the thrill of unwitting rebellion, I felt buoyed by the camaraderie that filled the space. Our voices melded together in a chorus that echoed my resolve. "We will make it happen, a gnome gala where laughter trumps regulations and joy elucidates creativity." Let's show them that a sense of community cannot be suffocated by the heavy hands of entitlement. With that, the plan transformed into our clarion call. I had the audience at my fingertips. Each new shockwave of solidarity felt like thunder rolling in the distance, ready to break. My heart raced as I considered the endless possibilities, the dear collaborative mischief that would come alive within our HOA abiding walls. Each individual comment reminded me that we had turned the tide, now fueled by the absurdity we faced. My home had become the battleground for shaking off the shackles of entitlement and celebrating genuine community spirit. And so began our journey into overthrowing the HOA with just a sprinkling of humor and a healthy dose of birthday party goes bad spicy gnome enthusiasm. This was our stand, and I was ready to lead the charge, armed with wit, a camera, and a ticking countdown to the greatest gnome party this town had ever seen. And with that fervor ignited in my voice, the cameras kept rolling, and the world beyond my living room was about to witness the most ridiculous revolution born from rebellion against a petty bureaucracy. The adventure had just begun. I launched into planning the Great Gnome Gala with the kind of fervor usually reserved for top-secret missions. The chat was buzzing with excitement and suggestions, and I felt like a conductor leading a symphony of chaos. Okay, team, we need a theme, and remember, it has to be epic. What would gnomes wear if they were hipsters? How about tiny beanies and flannel? Or we could go full-fashion mogul and incorporate runway lights. I can already picture it. My fingers danced across the keyboard as the comments flew in faster than I could keep up. People were brainstorming gnome tuxedos and garden party attire, as if they were prepping for the Oscars. It was equal parts outrageous and thrilling, and I couldn't help but imagine a zoomed-in, slow-motion spotlight on the runway as gnomes pranced past the audience. "Move over, Paris Fashion Week," I half-yelled, elevating the energy in the room. What surprised me more was how the likes of Danny transformed into my creative co-conspirator, practically vibrating with excitement. "You realize we could probably put together a better fashion line than 90% of what's out there," he said, eyes gleaming beneath his thick-rimmed glasses. "And don't get me started on gnome-inspired appetizers. We could create a gnome moza station with little cups of mimosa for everyone under 3 feet tall." I laughed so hard I nearly fell off my chair, embracing the absurdity that was quickly evolving into our battle cry. The community needed a belly laugh and a little absurdity to shake off the drudgery of HOA regulations. With each laugh, I edged closer to claiming this fight not just for myself, but for everyone who ever felt suffocated by petty rules and entitlement. And just as the enthusiasm peaked, I caught a glimpse of Karen's face through my live feed, a mixture of outrage and bewilderment that looked like she'd bitten into a sour lemon. She was realizing she was losing control faster than a toddler in a candy store. "This is absolutely ridiculous, Alex. You cannot just create some gnome-centered nonsense and promote it as an actual community event," she blustered, shaking her clipboard like it was a magic wand that could scare us into submission. Honestly, if her face turned any redder, I'd have mistaken her for a stop sign. It felt like the perfect moment to turn the volume up again. "Ridiculous? This is the state of creativity in our neighborhood, Karen. Gnome fashion shows and mimosa stations. Where else can you find this brilliance, huh?" I could see the chat going wild as supporters of our gnome gala rallied with comments like, "Karen's just jealous she can't pull off gnome chic." As the banter unfolded, I felt momentum shift from me to my community, an emerging sense of unity tinged with mischief. I could feel the power of what we were building, like a snowball rolling down a hill of hilarity, growing bigger and gathering followers along the way. "Listen up, everyone," I declared dramatically. "We need to form an organizing committee for this gala. Let's see just how far the absurdity can take us. We'll need decorators, chefs, and a DJ. Who's got connections? We can even invite local food trucks. I'm thinking themed treats, like garden veggie gnome-tastic nachos." Every idea fueled further laughter in the comments, uplifting us all and sending a wave of creativity surging through the chat. But the brunt of the hilarity hit me when a chat participant, Marge, suggested we create a Gnome of Honor award for the residents who exemplified creativity in the face of HOA conformity. "Do we have a blue ribbon category? Can we throw in Best Gnome Aesthetic for hilarity's sake?" she commented. The comments exploded with ideas for possible categories like Best Portrayal of Offended Garden Gnome and Most Likely to Get into a Clipboard Duel with an HOA Member. "A Gnomosaurus Rex would take the cake," I joked, envisioning a life-sized inflatable gnome rocking a cardboard clipboard for comedic effect. We were no longer just planning an event. We were creating an entire ecosystem of rebellion with a cherry on top of LOL. Even as Karen sputtered her protests at the absurdity unfolding, I could see the tides turning in her favor. seized with a mix of panic and incredulity. Every frantic wave of her clipboard felt weaker, the chaotic laughter of our gathering meeting each futile attempt from her to regain control at every turn. You simply cannot have a community event revolving around mythical garden creatures. It's not dignified, she protested in exasperation, a futile attempt at self-restraint. Oh, come now, Karen. If we're not allowed to have fun, then what's the point of living next to manicured lawns and pastel blouses? My words hung in the air, punctuated by roaring laughter. If only she could realize that each blank stare she received was a moment of loss, the absurdity of her entitlement crumbling both her composure and the HOA's facade behind her. With our plans swelling, I glanced at my camera feeds, filled with lively faces and joyful interactions aligned against the bog of entitlement that Karen represented. Empowerment surged through me. I had the spirit of a community behind me, ready to burst into celebration of all that quirky and absurdly charming. What began as a battle against intrusive HOA inspectors had transformed into a movement celebrating our uniqueness, and I was going to document every ridiculous festivity. Let's put the fun back in dysfunctional and make this community something to cheer about, I shouted, and the call was met with a cascading wave of dedication and hilarity. We were diving headfirst into the unapologetic joy that awaited us on the other side of the HOA's chains, equipped with nothing but cameras, creativity, and gnomes galore. Little did Karen know we were just getting started. The doorbell rang, jolting me back to reality like a trumpet blast from a malfunctioning marching band. I raced to the door, glancing at my live stream feed, still aglow with gnome-related shenanigans, when I pulled it open to reveal two strangers wearing quasi-official uniforms that screamed, "We could be frauds," louder than a bagpipe at a silent retreat. The duo, an imposing lady who matched Karen's pasty complexion and a balding man sporting a suspiciously thin mustache, introduced themselves as HOA inspectors. As they flashed their badges, who even has badges? A wild thought surged in my mind, and I felt my inner Sherlock Holmes awaken with vigor and disdain. Inspectors, huh? I quipped, crossing my arms theatrically. Is this another one of Karen's charming attempts to scare us into submission? Because honestly, I'm pretty much impervious to terror, especially if it includes a mandatory clipboard. Behind me, Danny was already firing up his tech wizardry, silently streaming their every move as I prepared for the showdown of the century, the HOA versus us. Please, step inside. I gestured, barely concealing my smirk as the two oblivious wannabe enforcers trotted into the waiting arms of their own folly. Who would have thought I'd find such comedy gold lurking right on my threshold? The way they began to inspect my perfectly mundane living room was nothing short of theatrical, waving their clipboards as if they were magic wands destined to banish all gnomish mischief from my home. The imposing lady began to lecture me about my garden shed's faded paint job, and I could hardly stifle my laughter at how unceremoniously ridiculous they looked. So sorry, my pretty little shed hasn't been keeping up with the Joneses. I threw in a nonchalant shrug while considering if I should turn it into a shrine for my magic DIY gnomes. And right on cue, Danny's voice echoed in my ear through the headset. Get ready for the punchline, Alex. He was watching through my strategically placed cameras, and yes, I swear I could hear him rubbing his hands together, the giddiness palpable. As the faux inspectors rummaged through my home, opening drawers and peering with exaggerated interest into my variety of camera gear, the epic finale began to materialize. I leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed, a grin plastered on my face as I glanced at the screen displaying my enormous live streaming audience, some of whom had taken time from their Saturday to witness this farcical composition. Hundreds of virtual eyes watched as I lectured my new guests about the ethics of art versus the rigid absurdity of their HOA reign, holding them captive like the unwitting stars of an off-Broadway show. I'm glad to provide some entertainment. Clearly you've got the nuance of seagulls fighting over a chip. My quip unleashed a flood of laughter, igniting a riot of emojis in the comments that fortified my spirits. Suddenly the door swung wide, and in marched an entire crowd of my neighbors, each wielding their phones like protective shields and furious weapons against Karen's iron grip. Did someone call for a gnome intervention? Danny chimed in as he switched to camera mode, showcasing the escalating chaos. As they collectively filled my living room, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief and unity wash over me. There stood Mrs. Thompson with her overcooked casserole, Tim from next door with a devious grin, and even the always quiet Leslie, brandishing a gnome-shaped cake with a proud flourish. All this madness had morphed from a gnome gala planning into a full-on neighborhood takedown of these faux enforcers. All right, everyone. It's showtime, I declared dramatically, rallying the troops as the atmosphere buzzed with hilarity. The inspectors stood stuck between bewilderment and realization, clearly outnumbered, their authority vaporizing faster than an ice cream cone in July's sun. With the right blend of jovial chaos, absurdity, and confidence, I knew I had the upper hand. You see, folks, I began, leaning down on my most charismatic stance, if you want to inspect anyone's behaviors, perhaps start with the neighbors who hide behind clipboards instead of just promoting actual community engagement. The crowd erupted in hoots and hollers, capturing not just the spirit of resistance, but also the hilarity of the moment. My audience online were rolling in laughter, with comments flying faster than popcorn in an air popper. Just as the weight of Karen's entitlement began to buckle under the sheer momentum of our laughter, the local authorities arrived, perhaps lured by the outrageous spectacle unfolding before them. They stood confused and slightly amused, a squadron of bemused policemen staring at the absurdity laid before them. I casually turned to our newly assembled audience and said, "Capture that, folks. This is what community unity looks like, and how entitlement meets its glorious demise." With a nod to my viewers, I couldn't help but feel this moment represented far more than a simple HOA dispute. It was a revolt against the ridiculousness that governs us. A powerful reminder that when faced with absurd authority, a gnome costume and a fit of laughter can change your world. Through unwavering humor and unexpected solidarity, we had turned an invasion into a celebration. And in that moment, riding high on the absurdity and our collective resolve, I knew this battle was not just for my home but for every quirky, creative spirit stifled by the all-too entitled HOA grip.